All right, guys. So here's the deal. These notes are called the infectious diseases notes or pathogens as we're starting or into this unit. Know this in advance. These notes are kind of long. They're going to take a while, and it would be pretty miserable if we were to listen to these in class because it would almost take the full period for me to read everything and wait for people to write down the blanks and then answer any questions. So I made this video that you can watch and you can fill in the blanks on your own. As you can see from the notes I gave you in class, they're not the usual notes that I would give you to where it would have images of each slide that you're looking at. Instead, the notes that you have are just vocabulary. So all I need you to do is when we get to one of the vocabulary words that's on your sheet of notes, make sure you write down and make sure you understand the definition. You will be held accountable for these vocabulary words, not only when you begin the research assignment on the virus that you choose, but also some of these will show up on the final exam. So don't just skip through this video and fill in the blanks to what the definition is. There's a very good chance that the things I say, in addition to what's in the notes, are going to be equally as important. So make sure you set aside some time, whether it's during E&I or at home or wherever, so that you can get these notes all filled out. All right, let's get moving. So the definition of a pathogen is this. It's anything that can make you sick. It's a microorganism, so it's going to be something very, very small and microscopic. It enters your body somehow, either by you breathing it in or through a cut or a wound. It then multiplies inside your body and, again, can cause disease. There are four main types of pathogens. Bacteria, which we kind of hinted on during the food poisoning unit. Viruses, which we're doing this unit right now and for the rest of the week, and there are also fungus and parasites that you learn a little bit more in 7th grade science that we don't really dip into for medical detectives. Again, an infectious disease is anything that's communicable. The word communicable is very important, so make sure you write it down. It's going to show up at the end of the trimester. A communicable disease is any disease that is able to be transferred from one sufferer to another. It's a fancy word for saying it's catchy. You're not supposed to come to school if you're sick with something that's contagious or catchy, and that is another word for communicable, and these are caused by the microorganisms that we're talking about. Bacteria. We're going to talk about bacteria for a few slides, even though that's not part of this week's research assignment. Bacteria are going to be single-celled microorganisms. They release these things called toxins that make you sick. Some examples of them are obviously what we did before the break, like E. coli and Salmonella. These are the ones that cause food poisoning, but there are many others, such as tetanus. If you ever get a cut or wound on maybe your knee or something, these tetanus bacteria can get in through a wound, and they live in the dirt and the soil. So whenever you get a tetanus shot, whenever you go to get your whatever yearly or checkups, it's to help prevent you from getting tetanus. On to viruses, though, because that's the meat and the potatoes of these notes in this week. A virus is the smallest pathogen out there. Very, very small, even compared to bacteria, which are microscopic themselves. They enter your cells and they pretty much take things over. They multiply and then they kill the cells that they're living in or within. Common viruses include the flu. You've probably heard of HIV. This is also chickenpox and Ebola and measles and smallpox. So for this definition, you probably don't know what to write, but if there's anything in this slide that you already know, don't bother writing it down. If you just want to write down examples of virus or that they're the smallest pathogen, write whatever you need to write down. Obviously, I didn't give you a line big enough for this entire slide, so just write whatever you want to know for the definition of viruses. Fungus, which we don't go into very much. Different types of fungi live out in our natural world, and not all of them are harmful. If you've ever had mushroom pizza, if you've ever had yeast that makes bread rise or beer bubbly, these are not harmful ones, but some of them are harmful. If you've ever heard of athlete's foot, this is a rash on that disgusting picture of, it looks like that's Mr. Hartley's foot. He probably has athlete's foot, which is just whenever your foot is dirty and it stays wet from sweat for long periods of time, that fungus gets in there and starts to actually grow and eat away at your skin. So it can be a painful rash. And then the picture in the bottom left, this one here, that one's called ringworm. It is not a worm in any way. It is in the shape of a ring, but again, it's not a worm. It is a type of fungus. This one is very common for wrestlers, whether it's Ridgeview's wrestling team or all the way through the Olympic level. It's a very common fungus that gets transmitted because as soon as one wrestler has it, that fungus gets on the wrestling mat, and then the next guy or girl to roll on that mat is also going to get ringworm. So it's pretty common. It can get treated very easily. It just doesn't look all that nice. Parasites are another one that we're not really going to go into because I know you do hit on it in 7th grade science. But a parasite is any organism that lives in or on another organism. And the thing that it's living in or on is called a host. And basically it sucks the nutrients out of that host. It doesn't want to kill it. It just wants to get nutrients from it. Examples include tapeworms, heartworms, fleas, bed bugs, lice, even some leeches, and mistletoe, which is a common Christmas time plant. The picture on the right, these are disgusting heartworms living inside a heart. Humans don't normally get heartworms, but they are very common in pets. And all these white little stringy things in here are those parasites that are heartworms that slowly take the nutrients out of the living thing. The main difference between a virus or bacteria and a parasite is that a parasite can live in or on the host for a long period of time. A parasite does not want to kill the host because that's its home. If you have bed bugs living inside your bed, they don't want to kill you because if you were to die from bed bugs, then those bed bugs wouldn't have another host to keep sucking blood out of, and they would eventually die themselves. So a parasite is very different than a predator-prey type of relationship. As far as spreading infectious diseases go, there are a couple ways to do it. Of course, you can come into physical contact with an infected person. You can come into contact with a contaminated object, such as like sharing a water bottle with your teammate on a sports team. It can come from environmental sources, just like the air and soil. Or you can come into contact with contaminated animals. That's how the main one, rabies, is spread, by being bit by a rabid animal. As far as contaminated animals go, it can come from animal bites, and the common ones that you've heard of probably are rabies and malaria and bird flu. Birds typically don't bite, but an animal with rabies can transmit it through a bite. Malaria is spread through a contaminated mosquito, so on and so forth. As far as contaminated objects go, most infections die quickly when they're exposed to air. So if someone has the flu in class and they sneeze up into the air, yes, you could contract that flu virus within a small amount of time, but eventually that flu virus is going to die. It doesn't live very long outside of the human body, which is a good thing. Otherwise, we would all just constantly be sick all the time. Coming into contact with a contaminated person can be through skin-to-skin contact, such as a kiss or a high five in the hallway. We already talked about sneezing and coughing. The cold and the flu and chickenpox can all be transmitted that way, and also the dirty nasties that you learn about in health class. If an infected person is not taking the proper precautions, they can obviously spread that virus to someone else. Environmental sources that we talked about a few slides ago commonly have to do with either food or water or even the soil that you play in outside, or like a sandbox at a park. Lead poisoning and food poisoning, there's fungus and mold and all these things that can grow outside or in water sources. If you have old food sitting out, such as bread, you've probably seen mold growing on it. And as I stated earlier, contaminated animals out in the environment can transmit these viruses and other pathogens. So that's kind of the background information, and the rest of these slides and the rest of your notes have to do with the 7 stages of disease. And we're mainly talking about viruses, but it's very important that you jot down and understand these because these are all requirements for your virus research project. For each one of these 7 stages, you have to give the specific information as it pertains to the virus that you choose. So if you have questions about any of these stages, make sure you ask me in class so that I can clear them up for you. They are exposure, incubation period, prodromal period, acute stage, recovery stage, convalescence, and immunity. Exposure is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you first get exposed to the virus, whether it's someone sneezing on you, whether it's drinking a contaminated Gatorade bottle at a sporting event. That's just how your body is exposed to it. You now have that virus. It is inside you, and that transfers over to stage 2, which is the incubation stage. And the incubation stage is when that virus is inside you, but it's growing and it's multiplying. So you're not exactly sick yet. You can see there are no signs or symptoms during the incubation stage, but it is inside you. It's just waiting to kind of get more soldiers before making you sick. The third stage is the prodromal stage, and this is the first stage where you have signs and symptoms of being sick. So during exposure, you're not technically sick yet. During the incubation, you're not sick yet. But during the prodromal stage, this is when you might get a fever. This is when you get body aches or a cough or sneezing. And at this stage, you are officially contagious, meaning you can spread it to someone else. And this is what's scary about it, because we have students at school who might have the flu virus or whooping cough or whatever it is, and they're coming to school during the prodromal stage. So they're starting to feel crappy, but maybe they didn't want to miss school, or maybe their parents are making them go, and they might not even realize that they have a bad virus and they are contagious, so they can spread it to their classmates. The next stage is the acute stage, which is a weird sounding name. Acute, if you remember from math class, typically means small. And the acute stage is the exact opposite of that. The acute stage is when you are going to be the most sick. So imagine the last time you had the flu or some other virus. Imagine when you were at your worst. Your fever is the highest, your body aches are miserable, you might have the chills, your eyes could be swollen, runny nose, cough, all that stuff. That is the acute stage when you are at your worst. You are also the most contagious at this point. So this is chances are when you're saying, you know what, I'm not going to school today, I feel miserable. The next stage, though, things start to get better, and that is the recovery stage, aptly named. The signs and symptoms begin to decrease. So if you had a fever before, it might be starting to go down. Your body aches might not be so bad. You might not be as stuffy-headed. You're still sick. However, you're starting down the path to recovery. Of course, that is the recovery stage. Convalescent stage, the infection is gone. You're not exactly 100%. You might be a little weak. You might still be a little sluggish and have some fatigue, which means being overly tired. But you are starting to feel better. The infection isn't gone. You're feeling better. You might come back to school. However, very bold words here for a reason, you could still relapse. And normally when we talk about the word relapse, we're talking about a drug user, like someone quits doing drugs, but then they relapse and they start using drug again. In this context, when we say you can relapse, we're talking about you could get sick again. So the problem is that, imagine you're one of our basketball players and you've been sick all week, you missed practices and stuff, and then you're starting to feel better, and you enter this stage and you go back to practice. And that practice, you're tired, but you're still sweating and you're working hard. Your immune system is kind of beat up from fighting off the infection, so you could relapse and get sick all over again. So when you're in this stage, you need to still drink plenty of fluids, get plenty of rest, and limit physical activity so that you can get to be 100%. Finally, the last stage is immunity. You are back to your old self. You feel 100% better. Your body has now developed antibodies so that you can never get that infection again, and you're good to go. You're 100% at this point. That's it for the notes. Now, if we were to do this in class, that would have probably lasted about 45 minutes just because I would have been explaining things more thoroughly and answering questions. So if you have any questions on this stuff, you can either write it down on your notes, like maybe on the back of this sheet, and whenever you see me next, you can ask about these stages. But I can't stress enough, you have got to know the definitions of communicable and parasite and virus and pathogens, but you also have to know those 7 stages of infection, because not only do you need to know them for your virus research project that you're beginning this week, but they are fair game for the end of the trimester's final exam. So ask any questions. I will help you out the best that I can. That is it. Let's see how I do this. Oh, there's my daughter. Hey, kid. How do I stop the recording? Quit.